The first thing I think we need to look at is why did we choose this particular theme? If you look at your folders, the theme says building an in-house lecturer competence management system in TVET colleges. And what's on that slide is not groundbreaking. It simply says why lecturer competence is so integral to what happens in colleges. The lecturers are the most valuable and the most concentrated resource in the colleges, given the fact that we are education institutions. So there can be no question about why at any point in time, lecturers, the professional people who drive the system, have to be the focus of what we do. But lecturers are fundamental in the learning experience of students, and that's a point we are making. They affect certification rates overall. Why that is important is because that's how we report as a department. We can be saying wonderful things about how we are driving the systems, the innovations, the other kinds of successes, the changes we are making, change management, organograms, and everything else that's at work. But in the end, we are judged by one single output, and it's just a single number. And that number makes the world of difference. Did that number go up? Did it stay the same? Did it go down? And depending on what that number says, there's a whole lot of accountability that goes with it. So the whole issue of certification amongst our students is fundamental when we speak about lecturer competency. It influences institutional efficiencies by virtue of the fact that if lecturers are not sufficiently competent, they cannot deliver the goods, the institution gets hamstrung, both in terms of doing its work, what it should be doing, teaching and learning, and its reputation suffers. And it's a very expensive exercise. If students do not pass, if there are high failure rates in institutions, efficiency is about making sure that the inputs are commensurate with the outputs. That's what efficiency ultimately signals. And if we are not getting sufficient outputs, it means we are inefficient as institutions and as a subsystem in its totality. Obviously, there's always a question of what's happening to the money we are spending, all the money we are plowing. And everybody knows that the college sector is getting billions and more billions and more billions, whether it's on infrastructure, whether it's on bursaries, whether it's on expansion for enrollments, it's always in billions. And that raises a lot of eyebrows. And of course, it makes us a lot more accountable because the general public knows that. And ultimately, it reflects the professional character of colleges. If we are reputationally known to have a weak teaching labor force in our colleges, we can never aspire to enjoy recognition and respect for what we do in our institutions. So at the pinnacle of all of this, it's how much of respect we can command with the professional service that we offer in our institutions. And at the heart of the professional service that we offer are the lecturers. Just to give you on this slide, you know, where our imperatives come from for lecturer development, it's everywhere. If the National Development Plan speaks very specifically to lecturer capacity, not just about colleges. The National Development Plan up to 2030 doesn't speak fleetingly about the college sector. It speaks to lecturer capacity very, very specifically. There's the white paper that's just out. We all know, we've been to presentations in that. There's the colleges turnaround strategy. The colleges must have them. Senior managers have to engage with those. So it's there and you should be familiar with it. The lecturer qualifications policy that came out last year in June alludes to what the deficiencies are and what the policy aims to address. The NCV review report, the National Certificate Vocational Qualifications review report delivered by the task team, ministerial task team, also speaks extensively about the gaps in our lecturer competencies. Several Umalusi reports generated for different purposes speak to that. NSDS 3 focuses on that lecturers need to be developed, even if it's just in relation to workplace and workplace experiences, but that can't sit separately from other competencies that lecturers have. They've got to have their disciplinary knowledge, they've got to have their pedagogical knowledge and so forth, and complementary to that is the workplace integrated learning component. Very similar with the skills accord. The skills accord is a social compact with various role players, both public and private, and part of that intention is to develop lecturer capacity. The educators in the sector who need that kind of experience that can be provided by our social partners. And then there's a host of research and survey reports on the performance of colleges that also speak to this. I mean, there are just so many. DHET itself has produced several. So clearly, this initiative is to send out the signal to say that lecturer training at the very basic level and the very individual level cannot happen through the efforts that we conduct as a national department. You have to assume that responsibility as a normal part of college operations to capacity build lecturers, because they are there, they do your key work, and you can't ignore any gaps or deficiencies as long as you are deploying them to classrooms to teach a cohort of learners. With that comes a very serious responsibility. And if lecturers are deficient in whichever way, it is our responsibility as a department and as college management and support services to ensure we do something to begin to close those gaps in some systematic way. So it's trying to create an awareness, or rather advocate the absolute importance of this kind of support service being located inside the institution. It's not necessarily about setting up a fancy HR facility. That's not what this is about. It is more about a culture and an ethos of development, of support in the college. It should not be relegated to 2 or 3 people to do that kind of thing, because they're never going to achieve what we want to achieve. The culture and the ethos we are talking about through institutionalizing it is to say, how do we use the old lecturers to support a lecturer who just comes in brand new, cold, from nowhere, who's not even an educator, but for some reason we brought this person to do some teaching here. How do we systematize in the institution to say, as a matter of routine, a brand new lecturer will be supported in this way? And it might just be by a seasoned lecturer who's been there for a long time. But there is a preconceived arrangement. It is not about people trying to find each other and trying to coerce some kind of support and interest in my woes. So it's that kind of thing. How do we use more experienced and less experienced lecturers? How do we use people with expertise? How do we use people who have acquired qualifications that speak, to development, how they can be utilized? And those are the early beginnings of how we begin to institutionalize the culture of wanting to improve people's performance and their competencies. It must become a normal thing. We want to introduce a diagnostic approach to lecture development, which only can be done at a very local level. In other words, diagnostic approach means what is the exact gap? What is the exact deficiency that needs to be addressed? Because your teaching cohort is not a homogeneous cohort. People have different strengths and weaknesses, and that is where the diagnostic approach would help. Who needs specifically what to be able to improve their professional performance? We need to have monitoring. That is a big gap. There isn't sufficient monitoring, and this monitoring has absolutely nothing to do with salary increases and bonuses and notch increases and what have you. It is totally devoid of that. It's not your IQMS. We are talking about monitoring, where the monitoring interacts with the support. If you want to monitor, you must know what you want to monitor. If there's something developmental playing out there, what has been the outcome of that? If somebody is providing support, is that support helping? Is it achieving the desired result? So it's not connected with the whole professional evaluation, and it's the only way to get some success there, where the lecturers must not feel as if the observation is conflicted with some monetary return that is at risk. That the moment those two become conflicted, the whole focus and purpose is lost, and it gets people's backs up, I think most importantly. To entrench a culture of personal motivation and responsibility. Development for lecturers can't be located on the outside. There must be some semblance of personal drive to want to be a better educator. And as management, that's a big challenge, to instill that. The personal desire to be good at what we do in this teaching and learning environment. And that doesn't come easy, but it's a systematic way. One would have to adopt a systematic way of chipping away at it so that people are... And I don't believe that really doesn't exist. I have come across people in colleges who are so personally driven, who want to do what they do well. There are those. What we are saying is that must become the norm rather than the exception. That's what we really want. We must encourage teamwork and professional cooperation in the college. From what I hear, there's very little of that goes on. In tiny corners in colleges, it's happening. Some are doing it well. But in the main, it's not happening. Lecturers feel very isolated, very alone. They feel it's a very lonely job. They don't know where to turn to for support, even in the institutions. So that's another key area we need to look at, because we are institutions with one, professional team in totality. We need to develop a system. The key word there is perhaps system of ongoing lecturer capacity building and support. It must be a norm again. It speaks to the same. It mustn't be linked to an event or a moment in time or a special, or to coercion or to somebody demanding that it happens. It needs to be entrenched as as part of the normal operations of the college, that lecturers need to be developed. And finally, to ensure improvement in teaching and learning as an inherent part of the college mission and operations, which means it elevates this to the overarching intention of the institution. It's not relegated to a corner, as I said before. It is an overarching mission of the institution, and it should be provided for in different ways. It should be engaged on in different ways so that everybody subscribes to the same view of how this will happen in the future.
We are, for the purposes of this project rolling out, we are understanding lecturer workplace exposure, or what we've been calling LWE, to be a form of continuous lecturer professional development that we see as taking place through periodic industry placements and other forms of on-site engagement with employers. For us, it's cumulative, and it forms part of both initial lecturer qualifications and their continuing professional development. This term that we're using, LWE, is, there's a lot of terminology in the field, but really it's part of the broader, it falls under the umbrella concept of WIL. So it is a form of WIL that's directed towards lecturers in particular. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? Well, again, if we look back at what Aruna was saying about lecturer development in colleges and the need for lecturer development, with regard to workplace exposure, because this is technical and vocational education, there is a need for our lecturers to have knowledge and skills that line up with industry, because we're teaching for industry, we're preparing our students to go into the world of work. So they need to, on an ongoing basis, be updating themselves. Initially, that's developing it in line with, and then updating through exposure to how industry works, how it works out there, and particular in relation to the subject they are teaching. They're in their field of training, how that applies, how that actually applies. So, for instance, if you're teaching accountancy, how do they actually do month-end statements and year-end procedures in the different companies that you're busy teaching about? Then when it comes to specific technology and systems and processes, we have in our curriculum certain things that we use. Let me use the example of accountancy, where you're using a particular program at the college that's part of the curriculum. It's not the same in industry, so it's important to find out what packages are they using in industry. How does it differ from what we're actually teaching, so that you can prepare your students for what they're going to see when they're out there. The goal of this is much bigger than just developing a lecturer's knowledge and skills. It's about making sure that our colleges are providing good quality education and training that is relevant to industry in this country, that our students are employable, and that they're actually getting jobs. That's our purpose as FET colleges, as TVET institutions. So that's why we're doing this. Just to give you a little bit of background on the SACI project, the SACI LWE project, all of the colleges, as Aruna has said earlier, know SACI. We've been working with the colleges for many years, in fact since 2008, on providing workplace-based exposure for students, and there's always on the side we've been trying to get lecturers in as well. This project, though, we started concertedly in 2012, where we really wanted to look at how this can be done. We found in the early days, when we were doing it alongside the students, that it wasn't as straightforward as just sending a few lecturers to industry. It didn't work quite the same way as it works with students. So we needed to find out how we can make it work. So we established in 2012 a research project. The two colleges that I'm sharing the platform with today are two of our research colleges. We've learned a lot from them. We researched with a couple of the colleges, and then we brought on others for piloting. So initially it was doing research and piloting. There were 10 colleges that we worked with. They implemented to varying degrees of success at that stage, but we were really learning, how could this work within colleges? How can we make this work so that it fits in, that employers can do it? What is the best way? So that's what we started to do. Very importantly for us in this project as well is that we want this to line up with everything else. We don't want silos of things going on. We don't want there to be a lecturer workplace exposure project and then there's qualifications being developed by the universities. All these things must line up. It must fit into the human resource development system of a college. It must line up with professional qualifications. It must line up with continuing professional development requirements of lecturers. So we need to fit it in within the system, and all these systems must fit together. So that's what we're hoping to try and figure out. We are wanting to, as I said, we've worked with 10 colleges. Not all of the colleges got it going to the same extent, but we would like to, over the next 3 years, expand it to all of the colleges. We'd like to take in what we've learned and share that with colleges. So that we're going to be doing in partnership with the ETDP CETA, who will be supporting us and the colleges in doing this. We're also collaborating with the higher education institutions with regard to this component of the qualification. The qualifications all require that lecturers will, as part of the will component, spend time in workplaces. So we are already talking to and working with the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, the Free State University, WITS. These are all universities that are going to be offering these professional qualifications. And then lastly, also, we are providing advice to the DHET where we can on this. I've got the dates for the rollout there. Just very quickly, what does this entail? Just some elements of what it entails to implement LWE in a college. Firstly, we need to understand what we mean by this. And that might seem obvious, but it's actually not. We all understand it in slightly different ways. So what do we understand by a lecturer having workplace exposure? And what does that mean? What must the lecturer actually do to get this? What is its purpose? What are the requirements? So when we're saying lecturers must do this, what do we mean? What are they required to do as employees of the Department of Higher Education and Training in this regard? What do their colleges require of them? What does the professional qualification system require of them? Planning and managing it in the college system. How is this actually going to work in the college? And then each lecturer, again, just to pick up on a point that Aruna raised earlier on, it's something that comes from the lecturer. each lecturer it's necessary for that person to plan and manage and drive their own personal development. This forms part of somebody's own professional development. It's something they need to do their whole lives. So they must know how to do that. They must know what it entails. Then there's a whole element of working with employers. We are placing students with employers. We're wanting lecturers to work with employers. That's a whole area of work that needs to be managed. Then that needs to be monitored. There's support for the whole process and review. We have to evaluate, review, look at what we've done, learn from those lessons, build it back into what we're doing next time. And finally, very importantly for us, this one here, integrating LWE into teaching and learning. Often when people talk about placement of lecturers in workplaces, they're focusing on the act of the placement. But the reason why you're doing that is to improve education and training. And you only see the benefits of that if it actually comes back into the classroom, if it actually comes back into the curriculum, if it informs what happens in the workshops. So there's no point if you just send people off, then they come back and nothing changes. And we all know from training, people do training, they come back, nothing changes. There's no space for them to put it into what they're teaching, learning, nobody wants to listen, and everything carries on as normal. So we can't say we've succeeded when we've counted the numbers. 10 lecturers went into the workplace. You've only succeeded when you've brought it back into the curriculum and it's now making some kind of impact. So monitoring that impact is important. We assume it's going to make a big difference, but we need to prove that it is actually making a difference. And then obviously there's the reporting. Just very quickly, my last slide before I pass on to Melanie is that when we implement lecturer workplace exposure, and all of the colleagues here today will have seen this cycle because it's the same cycle we use when we implement this for students, workplace-based experience. It's a process. It's not just something that you do once off as an event. To do this as part of the college system on an annual basis, there is a planning process that's necessary. Colleges are setting targets, they have goals. There's a lot of preparation that is necessary as well. Recruiting employers, making sure that everybody understands what's required, how it's going to work. Setting these engagements, these processes up so that they are effective. You look at the literature, you speak to lecturers, it doesn't always work well. It's not always beneficial. You can put people in industry, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a good thing. You have to make it a good thing. And you can make it a good thing through proper planning and preparation and everybody knowing how it's going to work and so on. So that's really important. Otherwise, you're going to end up having frustrated lecturers, frustrated employers, and it being a waste of everyone's time. Then phase 3, the engagements are, and when I talk toward the conclusion, you will see why I'm using the word engagement and not placement, because we're seeing this as being more than just placements. It's interactions with employers and with workplaces in various ways. And then after that, there is a post-engagement process. People are now bringing it back into the classroom. They're now, for the point of view of their professional development, preparing portfolios and all the things that they need to do to comply on that side. They're reviewing, learning the lessons and building it into the next phase.